Good morning, all of you. I welcome you all to Ansarkari, and I hope that you all must be doing great. So let's start with today's analysis video. So Biden visits Kyiv and he pledges more military assistance, and he says that he promised around $500 million in fresh arms deliveries and unwavering American support ahead of the first anniversary of this war. We are seeing that 1 year later, the Kyiv stands and Ukraine also stands. So democracy also stands. And so he pledges more support. And obviously, if he is pledging more support, then obviously NATO is also standing with Ukraine. And another topic that we'll be taking up today would be regarding the law to raise the marital age of women. It is not just enough, and there are enforcement issues which needs to be addressed. So EPFO list norms for opting higher pension. And after several days of discussions, the Employees Provident Fund Organization issued a circular to its regional offices with a set of instructions to implement the November 4 Supreme Court verdict on higher Provident Fund pension. And it lists all the procedures and required documents for existing employees and for those who retired after 1st of September 2014 to claim higher pension based on the actual salary beyond the prescribed ceiling in the employees' pension scheme of 1995. So when people failed us, PM saw our talent and made us governors. So Telangana governor says that when the people fail to recognize the leadership skills of certain candidates and elect them to the parliament, prime minister and home minister, they appointed them as governors so that their talent was not wasted. And people of Tamil Nadu did not recognize our leadership skills. Had we been elected as members of parliament, we could have become ministers, but we were not elected as MPs. So here you can find out about the pardoning powers of a governor and what are the other issues related to governor. And so there are certain issues with respect to certain states, and you can find out about them. Now, again, the same situation is being feared in Uttarakhand as it was witnessed in Joshimath, and people are again protesting over the projects which are going on in the region. So they are protesting against the Bokang Baling hydroelectric project, which is there in Pithoragarh district, and it is there in the state of Uttarakhand. So we are like witnessing a kind of same situation in other places also. So it is obviously because of the pressure of urbanization, which has been going ahead in an unplanned manner, in an unscientific, and that has obviously started showing results that if you are going to tinker with nature, definitely it would be responding, but that too at a massive scale. So there is SYL canal issue between Haryana and Punjab. So Haryana is committed to constructing the SYL canal. This is what the governor of the state tells to the House. And he was delivering his address on the first day of the budget session of the 14th Haryana Assembly. The state government is committed to constructing this canal in order to get the state's share of waters in Ravi Bias rivers. So this is one of the, we can say, water disputes between these two states. So you can find out about other water disputes in India. And here you should be knowing about which river is also involved. Coming to the editorial page, slow progress to creating a safe workplace for women. So, we're talking about women's safety and their inclusivity in the society. So, the recent case of allegations of sexual harassment that some of the Indian sports women, basically coming from wrestling, they are said to have have shocked us. And those affected had to sit in protest in the capital to make themselves heard. So, this shows that any internal complaints committee, if there is one, that is not functioning. So, when we talk about the internal functioning or the internal democracy of these institutions, specifically here in the context of the wrestlers, we have the Wrestling Federation of India. So we are seeing that even if there is an internal complaints committee and the wrestlers, they have to come up and protest outside at Jantar Mantar. So this definitely it is pointing towards that such committees, they are not functioning. So there is lack of effective implementation and then monitoring, and or we can say that the wrestlers were not aware about this thing. Then we also have Vishaka guidelines on reporting the harassment. They are meant to be followed by the government and even the private institutions equally. So in view of the sensitivity of this issue, the union sports minister, he constituted an oversight committee which was headed by a lady Olympic medal holder to investigate the charges leveled against the president of the Wrestling Federation of India. So subsequently, a committee was formed to investigate this whole issue and the allegations that were leveled by the wrestlers against the president of the Wrestling Federation of India. And then in February 2021, a leading woman journalist celebrated her victory not because the accused person who has harassed her sexually was convicted, but because she was acquitted of accusations of defamation that have been leveled against her by the accused. So the truth of victimization prevailed, and it was held that a woman cannot be punished for raising her voice against abuse. So she had raised her voice against her employer and a powerful politician. And obviously, it is very difficult to get such a person convicted. Though a specific offense relating to the sexual harassment, which is under section 354A, it was inserted in the Indian Penal Code in 2013, the allegation largely fell under section 509, that is to insult the modesty of women of IPC. So structural violence and data on workforce. Violence in the form of sexual harassment at the workplace is both direct and it is there in the structure. So while an enabling environment for reporting the direct violence that has shown a gradual improvement, indirect violence remains poorly addressed because it is embedded deep in our social and economic structures. So it is still there in our way of functioning. It is still there inside the institutions, in the structural manners, in the institutions. So the indirect violence also needs to be addressed. And it is more visible in the employment imbalance that is prevalent between men and women and in the organized and unorganized sectors. So with men more at workplace, they feel entitled and empowered to take undue advantage of the historical fact that the society is still patriarchal and women are not only in a minority, but also occupy a few of higher positions. So this is the social mindset, the mindset of specifically males in the society. And obviously, they kind of have that bossy attitude against the female employers, so female employees, and the number matters when it comes to power emanating from the majority. So one musters courage to voice one's grievance when there are sufficient numbers in support of the affected person. So obviously it requires huge courage to speak out. And when we look at the data, so the periodic labor force survey annual report available for 2020-21 shows that though the participation of women in the total labor force, it grew, that is labor force participation rate, it has gradually increased from 17.5% in 2017-18 to 25.1%. And the worker population ratio, it has also increased. So you can have a look at the figure. So both of these factors, they have increased, but we are seeing that data published in the latest quarterly bulletin for April to June 2022 was not encouraging either. So the labor force participation rate, it is defined as the percentage of the persons in the labor force among the persons in the population, that is both who are employed and unemployed but who are seeking employment are included in the labor force participation rate. And when we talk about the worker to population ratio, so it is the percentage of the persons employed among the persons in the population. So it is very simple, as the name suggests, workers to population ratio. So the absence of an enabling and safe working environment is one of the factors for the poor participation of women in the labor force. And it is generally believed that most women do not complain of the sexual harassment, and the current redress mechanism is either not existent or it is ineffective. So they are more vulnerable to exploitation by their employer, as they can be easily threatened with their job continuity for indecent favors. So unless the mindset of treating men and women as equals is developed at an early stage of character formation during the childhood, the two stereotyped power relations between the two would be difficult to change later on. So this can be one of the steps that we need to imbibe, and obviously this would be starting from in a household and also in the education system. So it would not be out of context to mention here a theory of criminology which is known as nature versus nurture. So it says that both genetics and the environment, it affects an individual's development. So both the genetics, basically when we talk about genetics, so it can be the social environment at a home, and obviously environment outside in education and in several, we can say, in social institutions that affects an individual's development. So that needs to be in such a manner that we are treating both men and women as equals. So while genes, they may decide certain features of one's personality at birth, it is the social conditioning and the environment of the family and early schooling which matters the most during the growth of children. And fixing goals, so similarly, providing a safe work environment is the responsibility of the employer. And the employer needs to ensure that the working environment is safe and it is women friendly. So we are having the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act of 2013. So the accused either resorts to multiple attempts at litigation to stall the due process or attempts to bring disrepute to the victim on flimsy grounds. So the situation becomes more complex when the accused himself is at the helm of affairs, as in the examples which we just saw. So therefore, it is essential to fix the goals to improve the workplace environment for women. And the short-term goals, they may include providing requisite women-friendly infrastructure, the constitution of internal complaints committee, then the spreading of awareness about the law and procedure of grievance redressal. And medium-term goals, it can include the increasing the female participation in the labor force, improvement of tooth to tail ratio, and providing incentives to prevent dropouts such as paid maternity leave. And in the long run, it is essential to address the deep rooted structural and cultural violence which puts women in a disadvantageous position. So, unless society as a whole works incessantly to bring about the required change in the existing social, cultural, and economic structures to eliminate indirect violence, root and branch, the status quo may not change. So, very beautifully, this article is talking about what can be the short term, medium term, and the long term targets and what steps can be taken for them. And we've also talked about the data and looked at the trend of two factors over here. And obviously, we have also talked about how the environment at home and school and the social conditioning matters during the childhood years. So talking about the GST reforms, the tax reforms, so we see that the sense of urgency to fix the GST regime's flaws that seems to have ebbed. So recently there was a GST Council meeting and it reached a broad consensus on establishing the GST appellate tribunals to resolve the disputes under the tax regime. And after like some fine print changes in the consultations with the states, the finance ministry hopes to include the legislative backing for the tribunals in the finance bill likely to be passed next month. So this raises hopes of quicker disposal of the GST disagreements that are adding to the court's caseloads. But the reason for delaying this vital cog of one nation, one tax promise that is difficult to fathom, and a few rate changes that could make, among other things, which you can see these are small things for which some rate changes has been done. So of greater concern is the stalling of the rationalization of the complex GST rate structure with multiple slabs and critical inputs left out. So this, we can say, reform is still pending. And a group of ministers was tasked in the late 2021 to propose a fix for anomalies in the GST levy, such as inverted duty structures, and propose the revised rates with fewer slabs. So a truly good and simple tax system will now likely have to wait till at least 2025, because coming year we'll be having the general elections. So talking about democratization, so even as the social media platforms, they have brought new voices into the public sphere, it is worth looking deeper into the premise of their democratization of self-expression. So when we talk about social media, so democracy there is also very important. So it is the creators economy. So the ability of the social media platforms to abridge expression is also playing out in the so-called creator economy. And in order to improve the user strictness and engagement, social media platforms, they have started compensating the users for original audio visual content, while sites such as YouTube, they have allowed individuals to create their own video channels and shared the ad revenue based on views. Platforms have increasingly moved to shorter video formats ranging from 15 to 60 seconds. So if we're talking about self-expression and democratization, so in fact, a significant portion of content is merely rehashed and that cuts for existing content. So we are seeing that the emergence of generative artificial intelligence such as ChatGPT, then DALL-E for text and the images, and respectively, there is a high possibility that self-expression will be further diminished by making it easy to generate content without requiring the individual to apply herself in any meaningful manner. And we have also been talking about the deep fake technology, even that has certain kind of threat, and the misuse that it can be done in a possible way. So undeniable fact is that social media platforms, they are a capitalist enterprise. Even though capitalism seemingly thrives on increasing user choice, standardization, and mass production, they are natural corollaries of capitalism. So social media platforms, thus, they promote even greater homogenization and mass production of ready-made expressions such as memes and emoji, because they are interested not in promoting self-expression, but they are more emphasizing upon engagement. So talking about the problems in the data protection bill. So firstly, here you should be knowing about which ministry is involved. So very simple to guess that there is Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, which has drafted this digital data protection the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, with the stated purpose of providing for the processing of the digital personal data in a manner that recognizes both the right of the individuals to protect their personal data and the need to process the personal data for the lawful purposes. So diluting the RTI Act. So firstly, the bill seeks to dilute the provision of the Right to Information Act, which has empowered the citizens to access information and hold governments accountable. So, for instance, the National Food Security Act recognizes the need for placing the details of the ration card holders and the records of the ration shops, including the sale and stock registers, in the public domain to enable the social audits of the public distribution system. So, in the absence of publicly accessible information, it is impossible for the intended beneficiaries to access the rightful entitlement of the food grains. So this is equally true for the delivery of other social security programs such as old age pensions and scholarships. And the RTI Act, it includes a provision to protect the privacy through Section 8. So in order to invoke this section to deny the personal information, at least one of the following grounds has to be proven, which can be the information sought has no relationship to any public activity or public interest, or is such that it would cause unwarranted invasion of the privacy, and the public information officer is satisfied that there is no larger public interest that justifies the disclosure of the said information. So the proposed bill, it seeks to amend this section to expand its purview and exempt all the personal information from the ambit of the RTI Act. So one problem is regarding the whole RTI Act and the intended amendment. And apart from that, further under the RTI Act, exemptions, they are not absolute. So a key provision for limiting the exemptions is the proviso to Section 8, which states that information which cannot be denied to the Parliament or a state legislature shall not be denied to any person also. So government has erred in interpreting this proviso as being applicable only to the privacy exemptions of the RTI law. So this bill needs to be suitably amended and harmonized with the provisions and objectives of the RTI Act, and not in a way like it is basically trying to overpower the RTI Act. So Privacy Act should clarify that publication of the personal data for the public interest and disclosure of information as required by the RTI Act should not constitute an infringement of the privacy. Secondly, by empowering the executive to draft the rules on a range of issues, the proposed bill creates wide discretionary powers for the central government and thus fails to safeguard the people's right to privacy. So we are seeing more centralization of power, and it is obviously the executive which would be having the powers to draft the rules. Thirdly, is given that the government is the biggest data repository, it was imperative that the oversight body set up under this law that will be adequately independent to act on the violations of the law by the government entities. So the regulatory body needs to be independent and autonomous, and obviously there should not be any governmental influence over it. But this bill does not ensure autonomy of the Data Protection Board and the institution that is going to be responsible for the enforcement of the provisions of this law. And finally, the bill stipulates that the Data Protection Board shall be digital by design, including receipt and disposal of the complaint. So as per the latest National Family Health Survey, only 33% of women in India, they have ever used the internet. So this bill therefore effectively fails millions of people who do not have meaningful access to the internet. So law to raise the marital age is not just enough as enforcement. Also, again, the whole problem comes to the enforcement of the laws. So again, here in terms of the laws to raise the marital age, we are seeing whatever existing laws we are having, they are poorly enforced and implemented. So over 60% Indian women aged between 25 to 29 in 2019-21, they married before their 21st birthday. So it is not a question of age alone. So the charts and maps, they are based on the National Family Health Survey 5. And this was for the period 2019-21. So here in the map of India, it is showing the share of women who were aged between 20 and 24 in 2019-21 who married before their 18th birthday. So it is, we can say, highest in these three states, we can say, in West Bengal, in Bihar, and then also in Jharkhand also. So these three states, and then also in Assam and Tripura. So more than 30% of, we can say, the women population, they have married before attaining the age of 18 in these states. And then when it is like between 21% to 30%, so there are many states in peninsular India and in the western India. So that includes Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, then you have Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Gujarat, Rajasthan. Then coming to the share of women who were aged between 25 and 29 who married before their 21st birthday is again in, it is higher in states like the same three states of West Bengal, Bihar and Jharkhand, and then in Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh and Rajasthan also in, and then Telangana, and even in Andhra Pradesh, in Assam and in Tripura. So these are the main hotspots when we talk about the child marriages also. So the top sugarcane producing states includes Maharashtra and Karnataka. So they are seeing falling sugarcane yields as the crops they matured early this cropping season. So talking about the retail inflation for the farm workers, so it is again at 6.85%. So which is, we're seeing that it is sticky and it has been now started to increase. So this is again become a concern for us. Talking about the autism disorders, so the autism spectrum disorder, it is the term for a group of neurodevelopmental disorders, and researchers, they are yet to fully understand the causes of it. However, they are beginning to find that a disorder in the gut brain axis could have a prominent role. So according to WHO, this disease affects 1 in 100 children. So the children who are affected with this disease, they have impaired social interactions, they lack verbal and non-verbal communication skills, and they display restricted and repetitive behaviors. So these characteristics, they can adversely affect one's cognitive abilities and over time diminish one's quality of life also. So the immune modulation refers, among other things, to the efforts of the immune system to ensure its response is proportional to a threat, and investigations of the dynamic crosstalk between the gut microbiome and the host environment have revealed potential connections to this autism disease. So reinstating a balance in the gut microbiome and reversing the gut dysbiosis among the children with ASD could alleviate many problems they face and improve their quality of life also. So here, like, you can find out about if in India do we have any body or any organizations dealing with the non-communicable diseases. So can we use the moon dust to slow down the global warming? So spraying the aerosols in the stratosphere, especially the radiation scattering ones, such as sulfates, does have a cooling effect. However, scientists, they warn us about its unintended consequences. So we'll be looking at what are the concerns related to them. So there is some reason to believe that the summerless year that followed the eruption of Mount Tambora in 1816, it inspired the novels, and we see that a sufficiently powerful volcanic eruptions, it can spew sulfates and other aerosols into the stratosphere, which cools the air there. So this fact has motivated people to artificially do the same thing to slow down the global warming. So this is one thing, that with volcanic eruptions, there is release of sulfates and aerosols, which have a cooling effect on the surrounding atmosphere. So this can be, basically, people are kind of estimating that this method can also be used artificially to slow down the global warming. But again, it's an artificial method, and obviously it would not be long lasting, and at the same time it would be having some unintended consequences also. So we can't just go about it like that. And here we're talking about the moon dust coolers. So a recent media buzz on this front is from a paper that was published in the journal PLOS Climate on Feb 8. So researchers from the US, they have proposed that billions of tons of dust can be launched from the moon to a point in space where the Earth's and the sun's gravitational fields, they cancel each other out. So the dust, it will thus be parked there, casting a shadow on the Earth and dimming the sunlight to offset the carbon emissions. While the aerosols in the stratosphere, especially the radiation scattering ones such as the sulfates, they do have a cooling effect. Let's not forget the consequences of the 1816 eruption. But we see that the cool summer, it sent the crop yields plummeting worldwide. So again, we are also having concerns related to food security. So it would be negatively impacted because of this event if we go ahead with it. And obviously that would be leading to more diseases and starvation. So many climate models, they have confirmed that dimming the amount of incoming sunlight with stratospheric aerosols will have a similar outcome. So some studies, they have argued that the resulting drought, it won't be as harmful, and the GDPs of most countries will be positively affected by such solar radiation management. But even state-of-the-art climate models, they are skilled only at stimulating the temperature response to changes in the solar radiation. So concerns about these models, the solar radiation management models, climate models, they are still woefully inadequate at estimating the precipitation response to solar radiation perturbations at all scales. So any projections related to changes in the rainfall as a result of blocking the sunlight will be highly uncertain. So we are like, obviously it would be impacting the pattern of the rainfall also, and again that would be impacting the agricultural sector. So therefore concluding that this model, it won't have unintended consequences in the form of drought and crop losses based on the models that can't reliably predicted the that can't reliably predict the precipitation would be foolhardy. So many natural as well as the social scientists, they have expressed grave concerns about the SRM science and the governance about it. So more saber rattling, more isolation. So militarization of the South China Sea. So the South China Sea has always been a transit point of trade since early medieval times, containing abundantly rich fisheries, and it is also a repository of mineral deposits and hydrocarbon reserves. So therefore, the current Chinese muscularity in the South China Sea, it is leading to a growing chorus of protest in the region, and not just by the Southeast Asian economies, but even by obviously US and other developed world. So amid the overlapping sovereign claims in the South China Sea, which is obviously claimed by China, the Philippines and the US, they are currently discussing conducting the joint Coast Guard patrols in the strategic waterways. And so basically, the Philippines, it invoked the dispute settlement mechanism of the UN Convention on the Law of Seas in 2013 to test the legality of China's 9-dash line regarding the disputed Spratlys. So you need to now spot the 9-dash line, which is obviously not not visible on the map, but it is drawn around the South China Sea. So you, whenever you like, you'll find this. You'll search for 9-dash line, you'll get it, and then you need to find the Spratly Islands. So in response to the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which is there at Hague in Netherlands, it decreed basically that it said the judgment that the line had no legal basis. So this 9-dash line had no legal basis, and China dismissed this judgment as null and void. So South China Sea, it is important not just to its littoral countries, it has been a transit point for trade since early medieval times, which contains abundantly rich fisheries and repository of mineral deposits and hydrocarbon reserves. So it is not just important from the perspective of having the sea lanes of communication, but again, at the same time, it is also an important repository of minerals and hydrocarbon reserves. And the UN clause, it provides that the Spratly Islands they must sustain the habitation and the capacity for non-extractive economic activity. And reefs and shoals that are unable to do so, they are considered low tide elevations. And also the award by basically the judgment by the Permanent Court of Arbitration also said it implied that the China violated the Philippines exclusive economic zone, and it noted that China had aggravated the situation by undertaking land reclamation and construction over artificial islands and had harmed the environment and violated its obligation to preserve the ecosystem. And again, obviously, China has been denying all these judgments and awards. Talking about ASEAN, so given that their economic ties with with China that are deepening, it may appear that ASEAN countries are bandwagoning with China. So in reality, there is growing discontent while avoiding the military confrontation with China. They are seeking political insurance, strengthening their navies, and deepening their military relationships with the United States. So Vietnam has also added 6 kilo class Russian origin submarines to its navy. France, Germany, and Netherlands, respectively, they have supplied formidable class stealth ships to Singapore, patrol bats to Brunei, and corvettes to Indonesia. And Japan is also partially funding the upgradation of the Indonesian Coast Guard. Indonesia and Philippines, they are in early stages of exploring the procurement of the BrahMos missiles from India. And other ASEAN countries that have shown interest, they are Thailand and Vietnam. So the entire region it is active and looking at this whole issue. And China's exploration and drilling vessels, they compete aggressively with those of the other littoral countries in the disputed waters. So China is just going ahead as per its wish, and Indonesia also protested to China about the Chinese vessels trespassing into its waters close to the Nantua Islands, which are towards the south of the South China Sea. So the Philippines protested to China earlier this year about the violations of the Filipino sovereignty in the West Philippine Sea. So locate the West Philippine Sea on the atlas also. So India's relevant options. So from India's perspective, the foreign and the security policy in its larger neighborhood, it covers the entire expanse of the Asia Pacific and it extends to the Persian Gulf and even to West Asia. So India straddles and is the fulcrum of the region between the Suez Canal and the Shanghai, which is between the West and the East Asia and between the Mediterranean and the South China Sea. So the South China Sea carries merchandise to and from India. So from the trade perspective, this region becomes important for India. And it follows that India has a stake in the South China Sea, just as China has in the Indian Ocean. So India must continue to actively pursue its defense diplomacy outreach in the Indo-Pacific region, increase the military training, conduct exercises and exchanges at a higher level of complexity, extend the humanitarian assistance and disaster relief activities, share the patrolling of the Malacca Strait with the littoral countries. So the comprehensive strategic partnerships that India has concluded with Australia, Japan, Indonesia, US, and Vietnam, they could be extended to Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and Singapore as well. So India must also buttress the military capacity of the tri-service that we have at Andaman and Nicobar Command. And according to one of its early commanders-in-chief, Lieutenant General Aditya Singh, the manner in which the 368 islands they have been neglected that can only be termed as criminal. So these have immense geostrategic value as they overlook Asia's maritime strategic lifeline and the world's most important global sea lane. So in this time of turbulence, India cannot afford to continue undervaluing one of its biggest assets. A vice president tells the panel to probe disorderly conduct of 12 MPs on breach of the privilege notice moved by a few members against the 12 opposition MPs for disorderly conduct, which forced the multiple adjournments. Rajya Sabha chairman, he directed the Privileges Committee of the Upper House to investigate the complaints and submit a report. So India is the first responder during the natural disasters, and India has emerged as the first responder to countries hit by natural disasters in any part of the world. And obviously, he was like addressing the 99-member self-contained Indian team that returned from the earthquake-hit Turkey, where it operated a fully equipped field hospital. And the country had also dispatched the aircraft carrying relief material and medicines to Syria under the move officially named, which was so this was named as Operation Dost. So India and Italy, they eyed the defense pact during the Melanie visit. So this is one of the things on our plan. And in talking about again the Indo-Pacific strategy, so Miss Melanie will be the third Italian prime minister to visit India in the past decade. And but the defense agreement, which is also tied closely to Italy's Indo-Pacific strategy, will be a first. So significantly during 2012 to 15, when Italy, India, the ties they nosedived over the arrest of 2 Italian Marines for the killing of Kerala fishermen off the Indian coast, Miss Melanie and her party, they had taken a hard line calling for the Indian ambassador to be expelled over this issue. So at that point of time, our ties severed, but subsequently the Modi government decided to send the Marines back to Italy, and the case was resolved mutually at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. And we have been strengthening our defense cooperation as well. So the Indian Navy's French origin Scorpion class submarines, they are still without heavyweight torpedoes after the Leonardo was blacklisted. So India and Italy are also engaged in multilateral fora in the Indian Ocean region and Indo-Pacific. So Kamla Kasturi, she was the founder of the Environment Society and she passed away. So she was involved in several environment protection projects and saving the Kaveri from pollution caused by dying units and taking up the cleaning of the river were the projects which were close to her heart. So she participated in several tree planting campaigns and was part of the public interest litigation petition against a slaughterhouse proposed to be constructed at the Red Hills in Chennai. So she was also a spiritual person. So center may notify the emissions trading scheme by June. So sector will be given energy efficient targets and companies that exceed these targets will get credits or certificates that they can bank or then they can sell them to other firms that have failed to meet the goal. So this is basically in the context of having a carbon trading market and that is there. So we'll be discussing this thing when we have more to discuss regarding this. So the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, a power ministry body, so this is under the Ministry of Power, it would be the nodal coordinator of this scheme. And sectors, for example, aluminium, cement, fertilizer would be given energy efficiency targets, and the companies that were able to exceed, so they would be like basically again they would be getting the carbon certificates and then they can sell that to other companies who fail to meet these targets. So emission trading schemes, as they are called, they are deployed in the European Union and even in Korea. And since 2015, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency has also been running the Perform, Achieve, and Trade scheme, under which 1,078 industries spanning 13 sectors, they have been getting energy security certificates if they exceeded certain targets. So while similar in principle, the credits generated under the forthcoming mechanism, it will force the companies to invest substantially more in deploying the alternative cleaner sources of energy to meet the efficiency norms, as they will likely have to meet a higher bar for the emission reductions. So again, this is a step in the context of transition towards green energy and also reducing the carbon emissions. So the play-based learning material for 3 to 8 age group has been launched, and this has been basically, so here it would be like involving toys, puppets, and story cards, which will be at the core of the implementation of the curriculum framework that has been prepared by the union government. And so this is going to be a key focus area of the national education policy to improve the foundational skills of the students. So it requires teachers' engagement to not only the textbook free, but also involve conversation, storytelling, toy-based learning, songs, rhymes, music, and movements, arts and crafts, indoors and outdoor games, spending time with the nature, and field trips. So it also lays emphasis on oral language development and oral math games. So the Cabinet Committee on Appointments, it has appointed the former Union Commerce Secretary and retired civil servant BVR Subramaniam as the Chief Executive Officer of Niti Aayog. So the Supreme Court says that only Parliament can amend the law to provide a uniform marriage age. So the power lies with the Parliament. So it dismissed a petition which was seeking to enhance the minimum age of marriage of women from 18 to 21 on a par with that of men. So we should not perceive that we are the exclusive custodians of the Constitution. The Parliament is equally the custodian of the Constitution, and Parliament can amend the law to provide uniform marriage age. However desirable it is, the power to do so lies with the Parliament. So there are some things which only the Parliament can amend and legislate, and we cannot enact the law here. That is basically, it cannot be done by the judiciary. So 13 MPs are going to get the Sansad Ratna Award. So 8 Lok Sabha members and 5 Rajya Sabha members, they have been nominated for the Sansad Ratna Awards, which are based on the performance in questions, private members' bills, and participation in the debates. France says that US and India, they have come in the way of taxing the tech giants. So international talks aimed at taxing the global tech giants that only declare profits in a few jurisdictions have hit a standstill due to the opposition from countries including US and India, and finance ministers have said this. So talks they come ahead of the meeting of the G20 group of large economies in India this week. So Russia is selling weapons at Abu Dhabi arms exhibition amid the Ukraine war. And so it included the Kalashnikov assault rifles to the missile systems, despite facing sanctions from the West over its war in Ukraine. And the event, it underscores how the Gulf Arab Federation has sought to embrace Moscow while balancing its ties to the West. And Turkey and Syria, they have been rocked again by a 6.3 magnitude earthquake. So still the risk is not yet gone, and the region, it is pointing towards that it is highly sensitive to earthquakes, and it is obviously would be one of the most highly seismic zones. And this we have like covered this topic in detail in one of the previous videos also. So we are seeing that sugar output rises by 2.8% during the current season. So sugar diverted for the ethanol production is almost 38% more during the current season. And the actual sugar production between October 1 to Feb stands at 228.4 lakh tons. Cereal prices likely to stay elevated going into the next fiscal year. So obviously, this is one of the major concerns for us, that the core inflation is also sticky, and even it is like the cereal inflation is making things much more worse because it is becoming much more broad based. So finance minister is saying that will continue to take efforts to curb the inflation. So government and the RBI, they are taking steps to control inflation. And among other moves, the government has increased the import of edible oil as required to rein in the inflation so that we have adequate supply, provided free grains to the poor since COVID-19 pandemic, and it would continuously monitor the prices also. So retail inflation rate, it rose above the RBI's upper tolerance band for the first time in 3 months to 6.52%, and RBI's target to keep the inflation between 2 to 6%. So this is the target range, and RBI will take necessary steps to manage inflation within expected limits. So economists, they have said that the soaring prices of cereals were a concern, even though the January inflation data may have overstated the extent of increase. Unlike some countries that calculate the CPI-based inflation using a weighted average of a segment of the population that pays the market price and those who don't, so India does not do that. And so here you can find out more about the approach that we use to formulate the CPI-based inflation. Coming to Financial Express, so we are still seeing that the Adani stocks are still falling, and the Adani's mid cap slips below $100 billion. So the fall pushes Adani to 25th spot in the billionaires list. So we talked about the upper circuit and the lower circuit in this context. So we have already looked into this article in the Hindu regarding the inflation. We've talked about the sugar output. So the bottom half of the population faced inflation by 40 basis points higher in April to December period. And again, this graph is showing the trend for the entire financial year 2022, how the inflation is performed. So this is for the rural inflation across the expenditure fractiles. So still we need more clarity when it comes to GST on the online gaming industry. Then for now, the current provisions are going to continue. So continuing ambiguity regarding the taxation on online gaming industry. So currently the online gaming, it attracts GST of 18%. So the report on the online gaming, horse racing and casinos was not taken up by the 49th meeting of the council, GST council. And so the group of ministers on the online gaming is basically understood to be in favor of levying 28% tax on the online gaming and horse trading in the casinos, but there is no consensus on whether tax should be only on the fees or the entire amount under the consideration. And accordingly, the GOM has decided that the final decision will be taken up by the GST Council. So oil meals exports in April to Jan, they rose 70% to hit the record high. So due to the record shipment of the rapeseed and soybean meals, the key ingredients in the cattle field, India's exports of the oil mills, they rose by 70%. So the industry sources said that the exports of the oil meals, they are often the extraction of the oil from the rapeseed, mustard, soybean, rice bran, and castor seeds in the current fiscal is likely to touch a record of 4 million tons. because of the robust global demand due to the competitive prices that are being offered by India. So South Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, Bangladesh, and Taiwan are the key export destinations of oil meals. And we have the Solvent Extractors Association of India. So you can find out more about this association. So we are having predictions and estimations that wheat crop might be hit because of March is going to be hotter than the normal. So again, concerns related to food security and obviously cereal inflation. We are seeing layoffs, they more than doubled since January. So more than 84,000 employees were laid off across 268 countries in January alone. So this is going to be a tough year for the big tech companies and for the IT firms. And we are seeing that the domestic air traffic rises nearly twofold in January. So you can see that 12.5 million domestic air passenger traffic in January against 6.4 million that was recorded a year ago. That was 54% Indigo's market share in January and declined for the fifth consecutive month. But we are seeing that. So these are different shares of the passengers being carried off by different airlines. So in solidarity with Kyiv, so Joe Biden's visit to Ukraine. So 1 year later, Kyiv stands, Ukraine stands, and the democracy stands. So America and the world stand with you. Kyiv is captured a part of my heart.